Hello to everyone. Thank you for coming to this. I have a little homesteady place in Canterbury where I have a large permaculture garden and some fruit tree plantings that have been stewarded, I guess, with permaculture in mind for about the last 10 years. I was raised to do just run-of-the-mill, normal gardening, straight rows with lots of dirt in between, and having turned away from that, I have found that gardening is much more productive and healthy and enjoyable for me. So I'd like to make that possible for all of you. And my focus this evening is going to be on what you can do to make your garden more resilient in the face of climate change. But all of these things are worthy to do even if you feel like you're in a sheltered area or that hasn't affected you yet. So that's it for my intro. I hope some of you are coming to the in-person thing at the garden. I'd be interested to know, if you want to put it in the chat, how many people have a passing familiarity with permaculture or have been practicing permaculture for a long time, and Kyle will fill me in on what your answers are if you feel like putting that in the chat. And we're going to get going. I'm going to breeze through some history of permaculture and how it's practiced elsewhere so we can focus on the New England region. But if we do have people from far away, please put your questions into the chat at the end and I'll do what I can to address them for different areas. So quick history, permaculture is a child of the 70s. It came about in the wake of Silent Spring and a growing environmental awareness, publication of a couple books that touched on related subjects, Soil and Civilization, which covered how the practice of annual agriculture had led to the destruction of soil and the fall of civilizations ever since modern agriculture was first practiced in the Fertile Crescent and the Nile Delta. Another book, Tree Crops, focused on, well, as it says, tree crops, permanent woody crops that were better at holding soil and leading to a stable civilization because of the stability of the agriculture. So with those books and Silent Spring and the environmental awareness, it was ripe for this partnership between David Holmgren, a graduate student, and his professor, Bill Mollison, to envision what they considered could be a permanent agriculture. And that their theory has been developed in many different directions and has really taken flight in many, many areas. But it has to be said that many of the things they talked about and envisioned are practices that were done by indigenous people in all kinds of places all around the world. And we're going to touch on a few of them with just the understanding that in the places where a permanent form of agriculture was practiced, those are the societies that thrived, sustained their environment, and did not destroy their soil and then die out as a result of it. So we're looking at a few of those next.
Laurie, do you want me to read you some of the chat?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so we got a couple people that said just learning, and Stacy, who said she attended the pawpaw workshop at the conference, which is great, has some familiarity but trying to do more. And we also have uh, a neighborhood and farm in Peterborough that has a permaculture plot, but they've had some successes and failures and are learning.
That's probably the Nubanusset folks that I talked to a
I
couple
I
weeks.
believe it is. I didn't want
Okay.
to mispronounce the neighborhood and farms, but you nailed it. So there you
Hi,
go.
Nubanusset people. Okay, so I am going to, no, that's, why is that not going to work? Just a moment. I'll do this one. Where are we?
You're all good.
All
There
right,
we
I will
go.
figure it out in the meantime. Okay, so this is an example of permaculture that was happening in Mexico City. There are still plots like this, but Mexico City, as it is now, it once sat in a bowl of intersecting waterways, And floating islands were created there that were so fertile with both with the climate and with the dredgings from the bottom of the water canals to keep them open. They were able to have 7 crops a year off of these plots, some of which are still in production, many of which were destroyed in the Spanish conquistadors move through South America. But that's a response to the circumstances of that place and the resources of that place. And that's always what permaculture does. There's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So another one, am I using?
Try this.
Okay. So these islands were called chinampas, very high crop yields. They fed 200,000 people in what could otherwise not be used in what we would normally consider agriculture. It was too damp there. And subsequent archaeologists, historians were always surprised that this area could feed that many people. But the historical record shows that they had very, very advanced civilization and agriculture there. So we skipped some, I think. How did that happen? Well, there's supposed to be other ones in there. Okay, so we'll just go with that.
You want to be there?
I'll just go back. Yeah, I'll go.
Okay.
The order is a little screwed up.
Okay.
Okay, sorry about that. So even in places where soils have been ravaged by erosion, by extensive logging, this is a picture from the Mediterranean where most of the soil is really just subsoil having been eroded away after forests were cut for shipbuilding and for smelting of metals. But these are places where there are trees in place that have crops, olive trees, also vineyards, and then annual crops are grown underneath them. The trees are anchoring what soil is left, helping to rebuild soil. And in the summertime, they produce a crop, whereas it's too hot and dry in the summer to grow an annual crop. So their annual crops are grown underneath these trees in land that is helped, anchored by them, but grown in the cool weather. And the woody growth, whether it's vineyards or olive trees, is deep-rooted enough to make a crop for them in the summertime. So even in places where there's been soil destruction, this kind of permaculture, incorporating woody crops in with annual, helps to rebuild the soil and keep things stable. So we'll go with that. So this is a little bit more of South America. All these black dots are places where archaeologists have found what's called terra prieta. And this was a very labor-intensive technique where biochar, ground up charcoal, was incorporated into the soil to the depth that crop roots would need. And they became much, much more fertile. Typically in jungle areas and tropical areas, all of your biomass is up in growth. It's in trees, it's in vegetation, and the soil itself is very thin. But this allowed nutrients and moisture to be held in the soil and not leach through, and kept those available for roots and for fungi to bring to roots. And those soils are still, thousands of years later, very, very productive. And there were interior Amazon areas, large cities, large civilizations that depended on this, that fed a lot of people, whereas around them, it's thin soil and infertile soil. So these were huge earthworks done just to make soil more fertile. And those are techniques that are applicable in many other places. So this is the difference in what the soil profile looks like in those places. On the right, you see it's thin soil, it's reddish, probably a lot of iron, not a lot of topsoil. The terra prieta, where the biochar has been worked in, is dark and rich and down to a good depth. Next. And that's a technique that a lot of people use regardless of where they're living, but it was developed in the Amazon. So here's another jungle picture of a milpa, which is more of a probably Central American, where you have mixed crops. You have your trees anchoring the system, basically banana trees, it looks like here. They're helping to shade the ground, hold the soil, and then you see annual crops underneath. Avocado trees were also often the anchoring tree in these. So this is a illustration of a technique that was used in Europe quite a bit and is applicable in a lot of places. This is willow coppicing, a technique whereby willow specifically, but it can be done with other trees, are cut to the ground, and then their shoots that regrow are used whether for basketry or for fodder or for building material, but the roots stay alive. They're still anchoring the ground. They're putting up growth every year. So during the whole growing season, the ground is being shaded, but other things can be also grown in the row in between. So you get the benefits of annual crops and roots that are in there holding the soil. So I know there have been there's been a soil webinar. Most people who are organic minded are aware of some of this, but let's just look at a little bit of what the soil is doing for us. So tons let me see if I can read this. If you raise your organic matter percentage of the soil 1%, it can hold as much as 25,000 gallons of water more per acre. So if you're raising your organic matter percentage by adding compost, by sheet mulching, any of that is going to make your soil hold more moisture, and that, helps it to be more productive. There are millions and millions of little organisms that are making the soil work for you. Healthy worms are always bringing organic matter down into the soil to be digested by bacteria and fungi. Healthy soil has fungi that will partner with plant roots and help them to access moisture and nutrients from further away than those plant roots would be able to reach on their own. So keeping your soil happy, feeding your soil is a big part of organic agriculture to begin with, but also like even more so for permaculture. And specifically, these 5 principles of soil health we're going to dwell on. First of all is minimize disturbance. That's your little tractor symbol. The less you turn the soil over, the healthier it's going to be. Turning the soil over the way it has traditionally been done in Western agriculture, you're exposing weed seeds to light, which makes them germinate. You're breaking fungal connections, so then the plant roots can't access the moisture and nutrients they need. You're helping organic matter in the soil and carbon to just oxidize, to dry out and end up in the air. Most of the CO2 that has gone into the air over the length of our civilization has been from agriculture, has been from the oxidation of carbon in the soil. So the less disturbance we do, the better the soil is going to be, and the more it'll produce for you. Maximize living roots in the soil. So that means having trees in there when you can, having shrubs in there, having perennials in there. If you only have annual roots that die every year, those fungi that live in your soil and help to spread water and nutrients around have no place to live during the winter, so they will not survive. So having perennials and perennial vegetables, things like garlic, things like perennial onions, rhubarb, asparagus, as well as, flowers and herbs, all of those help to keep healthy fungi in your soil and your soil doing better, your plants doing better. Maximize soil cover. So if your soil can be covered with a mulch, that's good. If it's covered with a ground cover, that's good. If you have a mulch and a ground cover, that's better. A mulch and a ground cover and layers above that are all helping to be companion plants to each other and shade the soil against excessive heat. That soil cover is going to be your friend and your garden's friend. Maximize crop diversity. There are no monocultures in nature. They are an invitation to pests and disease. And it's not just not having a negative. the reason you want to diversify your crops. They do so much better with diversity around them. And we'll talk about that at length to make that clearer. Integrate livestock, that's not always possible if you don't have a lot of acreage, but it's not hard to have a few chickens. They can be useful. You can use their bedding, which I do in my garden. It's not hard to get some composted manure from neighborhood farms or, at a feed store. Both the physical action of livestock on the ground, if you have a large space, can be very regenerative if it's managed properly, but also the biological activity of their manure, if it's properly composted, can really give a boost to soil. So all of those we'll be talking about. So in most natural forests, you have 7 layers, and this is something that permaculture seeks to emulate because it's about learning from nature, emulating what works best in nature, making it work for us. So you'll have your tall trees, climax species, or overstory. An example of food-producing ones for permaculture would be oak trees. Mostly that's food for wildlife. People do make flour out of it, but nut trees are usually tall and make an overstory. Low trees, so we'll just use apple as an example, but a lot of understory trees can produce lots of food for us. Climbers and vines, that could be grapes, it could be kiwis, and there are vines that just, make food for wildlife. We don't need to exclude wildlife from this because you can manage it. Shrubs, whether it's berries or whatever else you want a shrub for. Hazelnuts are shrubs. Willows are shrubs that you may not use for food, but for other purposes. Herbs, whether they're annual or perennial, I think they're talking about perennial here. Ground cover plants that are a little lower, and roots, and you have your 7 layers there, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, yeah. The further south you go and the hotter it is, the more able you are to plant these all directly under each other because they'll still be getting enough heat, they'll still be getting enough light, and the shade that they cast is going to be a help to all of them. The closer they are together, the higher the humidity will be around them, which is good for them. It may not feel great when you're in a humid place, but plants appreciate it. The more widely spaced they are, the more moisture they need because they dry out more easily. So here, where the sun is a little lower in the sky most of the year, you wouldn't be as likely to plant them all directly under each other, but a little bit staggered, So I have my apple trees would have a taller tree, say a sugar maple, behind them to the north, giving a little bit of shelter from the wind and giving a little bit of kind of companionship, making a grove effect, but the lower tree wouldn't be in the full shade of the overstory tree. So this is wild apples that have fallen off a tree in the late summer next to my garden. This is the kind of bounty that is natural when trees are happy, when you have a good functioning ecosystem. So that's kind of bounty that we can seek to replicate by having these natural systems working for us in the garden. So this is a kind of a distance shot of my garden with some tomatoes in the foreground at the entrance path. If you look at it, you'll see that you're not seeing a lot of bare soil. You're not seeing clumps of things that are large monocultures. There's herbs, there's flowers, there's vegetables, there's shrubs, there's a whole bunch of different things, and they work together really well. This was before I had a better handle on the weeds, but you can still see things are thriving. They're all close to each other. It's just green everywhere you look. And that's what you want. You don't want to have bare soil in your garden. And that's a 180-degree turnaround from what most of us were taught, but it is achievable. And when you get there, you'll know it. Things will be better. So one thing about permaculture, if you're not turning the soil over, if you do have perennials, shrubs, trees involved, it opens up a lot more possibilities for design. If you're creative, you have the time, you have the materials, you can make all kinds of gorgeous things. This is not my garden, but there are more possibilities for creativity when you do not have to keep the ground open for annual turning. You can have stone walls, you can have trellises, you can have little wattle fences, you can have all kinds of different things. And next we have a drone view, I guess, of a large plot that is permaculture designed. You can see there are hedgerows looking like they maybe are along the edge of a watercourse, shrubs, all kinds of things. It's just green and lush. And even though the ground around it is green, it's pretty barren by comparison. So it's obviously somewhere out on the Great Plains. So this is a overgrown log in the woods, and it's illustrative of one of the techniques that is widely used in permaculture. So if you're walking out in the woods, you know, there'll be fallen logs, fallen trees. Eventually, if they're shaded, moss will grow on them, seeds will grow on them, trees may even grow out of them, ferns will grow on them. If you go to pick it up after it's been there a few years, it'll be incredibly heavy. And that's because of the amount of water that wood can absorb is huge. Hugelculture is a technique. It means wood in the garden, basically. It's Austrian, I think. It's a technique of incorporating wood into your garden beds. And it doesn't have to be a raised bed. There are sunken hugelcultures. There's all kinds of different ways to do it. But wood in the garden gives you water holding capacity when other things are dry. Like in my garden where there is our hugelculture sections, the plants are accessing snow melt that was sucked in by those logs months ago, and it'll be there through the summer. They will soak up excessive rainfall and stop the soil from being muddy because they will draw that into themselves. I'm not even caught up on my stuff here. They also break down slowly over time. They're adding carbon to the soil. They're making homes for all kinds of soil life. And the nutrients and the moisture in logs, this is important, and it's similar to the function of biochar when that's incorporated into soil. Those nutrients and that water is not going to leach out through the soil. It is held there in the wood and is accessed and accessible only, really, to mycorrhizal fungi and to plant roots. It is there like a little storehouse underground for them. And the difference it makes in soil moisture and moderating soil moisture is amazing. In a wet year or a dry year, my garden looks about the same and it doesn't get watered. It's just that this underground reservoir is supplying moisture to my plants year round. So let's see. Okay. So this would be how you might start building a hugel bed, and talking about the different things you could incorporate if you're having a raised bed. But again, this could also be something you would do in a trench. If you have a low spot that maybe tends to be really damp, you can turn it into usable ground by doing a hugelculture in a low spot, building it up to the level or just a small mound. So a raised bed is a common way to do this. It's not the only way. So you could start with cardboard underneath if it was important to you to block grass that might be there, but you would put in whatever you had for wood, really. You can use pine or softwoods as long as it's not very fresh. You can use rotten old wood that will all start to seed the soil with healthy bacterial growth and fungi because it's already present in the wood. You can start with fresh hardwood and it will be longer before it breaks down, but it will last longer. A mix of all those things is ideal. If you also have brush you need to get rid of, that doesn't contribute a lot of organic matter because it breaks down so quickly, but the small growing tips of green brush, have the highest nutrient levels that you would find anywhere in wood. So if you have brush, you could put it in a hugel bed, weigh it down with some bigger logs, And those nutrients are going to be a really rich source for the soil, and they break down quickly. Also, as brush breaks down, it's making little inlets for air and water in the soil. So even brush, if it's weighed down with logs, is valuable in a hugelculture. Um, and we are really blessed to have water to soak up usually here, and to have wood that's easily available. Anytime there's a windstorm or an ice storm, you can go on Craigslist and people are just asking others to come and get wood that fell down. So it's not hard, even if you don't have a lot of land. It's not hard to find wood to fill a few hugel beds. There's always people who have stopped burning wood for heat, and they have old stack of wood somewhere that's rotting away. You know, it's easy to pick up wood around here. And this is the kind of difference you'll see in a tilled bed versus a hugelculture bed. The hugelculture plants have access to more moisture, more nutrients, and they're just much more lush. So this is building a hugel bed on the downslope around a maple tree in adjacent near my garden. We had jumping worms go through here and just absolutely trash the soil. It got very compacted. They ate up most of the organic matter. So I'm rebuilding there with a rock wall on the downhill side of this tree. It's going to be coming up a little higher than that. Logs that are on the soil surface, soil that's going to be covering them. And I put wool over it because wool deters jumping worms. But this is a hugelculture bed in progress. It's not much, it's a little bit of a raised bed. It's not going to be a garden bed, but it will be catching the leaves that fall from this tree and rebuilding the soil. And I'll be putting wool on it, which helps to drive jumping worms out, so they will not be able to stay there. And that's just another perspective of it from above. And this is just 3 happy gardeners in the garden, and there's not a lot more to say about that. So a few pictures of just mixed crops in the garden. In here, you might recognize nasturtium, that's with the little red flowers and the very round leaves. Those are an insect repellent. They are a really good companion to cucumbers and other members of the same family, squash. They help to deter cucumber beetles, and you can eat them, and they shade the soil really well. They will often reseed. They're just a good plant to have around. They're an annual, but you can count on them coming up every year if they drop a few seeds. Back behind that, there's little blossoms, which are on a trellis in the distance that are pink. There are sunflowers. There's some squash leaves that you can see all the way over to the left. All these things have got enough nutrients and water in the soil to be that close together. They're all getting what they need, and they're all benefiting from the insect repellent properties of some of them, and from the increased humidity that comes from they're just shading the ground underneath them. There's another slightly overgrown picture. We've got cleome, which is attracting pollinators. We've got sunflowers in the background. We've got scarlet runner beans going up a trellis. The trellis is shading some ground where lettuce has a chance to grow without bolting because it's a little cooler in there. So just another really busy picture of showing how much you can grow in one place. So shifting gears a little bit, there's a technique or a principle really in permaculture known as stacking. You want everything you do to have a lot of uses, and you want to have, how am I saying this right? So you want all your plants to have a lot of uses, and you want the uses that you need to be met by several plants. So here we have chickens. They are currently in this picture eating Japanese beetles that I collected, just about the only pest that I have a problem with. And it's relevant that it's non-native, so it doesn't have any natural predators around here besides skunks who will eat them. So the chickens are eating these Japanese beetles. They do that also when they're around the garden. They also scratch up their bedding and make good mixed composts for me to spread directly on the garden. I feed them one of my perennial crops. This is comfrey. It is the highest level of protein that you can get in a plant. It also is a very deep tap-rooted plant. These are known in permaculture as dynamic accumulators or living accumulators of nutrients. Their roots will draw stuff up from the subsoil that may not be present in your topsoil. As the leaves die and drop on the ground, they're adding those nutrients to the topsoil. So whether you let them just die in the fall, as they would, or whether you're cutting them and adding their leaves to the surface, they're going to be adding deep nutrients to your topsoil where it can really use it. So this is a stacking plant. It's doing things for the topsoil. It's feeding my chickens. And I can cut it because it's so productive and just lay it around things as a mulch. It has a lot of uses. Back to the chickens, when I have excess stuff in the garden, they get to eat it. There's so much kale being produced, I can't eat it. So they're eating stuff that's extra. They're making meat and eggs for me and compost. And if there's areas I want cleared, I can spread their scratch feed outside and they will, root up weeds and things for me. So they're stacking. They're doing all kinds of stacking. So this is squash growing on the wool mulch that I use. You can see the squash itself is pretty shaded by its own leaves. I used to have problems back when I had bare ground with squash bugs. When I started mulching, they would still show up. And then I started interplanting my squash with mint, knowing how vigorous it is and that I would probably regret it later, but mint does deter squash bugs. So I haven't had squash bugs in the garden for 8 or 10 years, probably. The mint is out of hand, but it is so useful and so helpful that when it's out of hand, I just cut it back. And so I've gotten used to that being the price I pay for having a very helpful herb in the garden. There are many, many things in the mint family that will attract pollinators and deter chewing insects. And with some of those chewing insects, like cucumber beetles, being ones that spread disease, it's kind of a twofer. If you can deter these from chewing your crops, you will also prevent them from spreading disease to your crops. Mint that you can use medicinally, you can use it in your food, you can make drinks out of it. And if there's too much of it, you just cut it off, lay it under a rose bush, and it will, prevent black spot there. It's just great stuff. It's a good chop and drop crop when it gets overly vigorous. And when the squash gets really big, it will shade out the mint and it will die back. So that's almost controlling itself there. And you get these little moments of joy when you're in the garden and somebody comes and lands on you. That's what the wool mulch looks like when I spread it. We talked about ground covers being one of the important 7 layers. This is lamium. It is also in the mint family. It's kind of an ornamental. It does spread vigorously. I love having it because if it's out of hand, I just pull it up and put it someplace else I want to. I put it around my fruit trees. It has a very acrid smell. And deer don't like it when they step on it. It is a mouse and vole deterrent. So it really deters all kinds of rodents. So I like having it in the garden. It gets out of hand and I just move it or I cut it back. I'm not very focused on killing things that I don't like. It's just slowing them down. And this is just a really valuable ground cover. Your vegetables can come up through it. You can make a little hole in it and your vegetables will grow right through it, especially perennial vegetables. And this is going to be shading your mulch, whether you have bark mulch, whether you have wood chips, whether you have wool, as I do, any kind of mulch helps with maintaining a more reasonable soil temperature. But the top of mulch can get really hot, and sometimes that can burn young plants. So this will even keep your mulch cool and moist. And so it just feeds that really healthy environment that plants need. A little more humidity, a little more shade, a little more cool for their roots, also keeps your earthworms happy. and it has pretty little purple and pink flowers. So this is an area where I just pulled back the wool on a hot, hot, hot summer day to show that even next to some bare ground, you can see where it's been bare, the soil is a lighter color, just pulling it back, that's how much damper it is under a wool mulch. And if you have any other good kind of organic mulch that's deep enough, you'll have a similar result. Not everybody has access to wool, although there's more around than you would think. But any good mulch will be keeping your soil moist, helping to moderate your soil temperature and moisture, preventing moisture from evaporating. So this might be a little hard to tell what you're looking at. This is the raspberry bed that is adjacent to my garden. And when I got the jumping worms to leave the garden, they all went into the raspberries. So last year, which you may remember was very hot and dry, the soil started drying out in my raspberries. All the mulch disappeared down the gullets of these jumping worms, and the soil was bare. In the places where I had already started growing lamium, and that grows very happily in the shade once these are fully leafed out. Even though the jumping worms had decimated the soil and the mulch, there was still enough moisture in the soil because this ground cover was shading it for the raspberries that grew next to it to do well, to mature a crop that was, rich, flavorful, and completely healthy. The areas where the lamium had not started to grow yet suffered a little more from the heat and the dryness we had last summer because the jumping worms had just decimated that topsoil. So now I'm in the process of getting wool in my raspberries, and the lamium will grow right through it. So if I have wool and I have lamium there, I know I'll have a good crop and that the jumping worms will be leaving. So again, another use for good ground cover. Anise hyssop is a beautiful perennial that I let grow in the garden. It is tall, it can self-seed very vigorously, but the bees absolutely love it. And when you're drawing bees to something they love, they will also pollinate your crops when they're in the vicinity. And that's a good thing. And we want to keep the bees happy. These will also draw more unusual bees than you may be used to seeing. Bumblebees, certainly, honeybees, but also little mason bees, all kinds of little wild bees that we want to take care of. And sunflowers make the bees happy. And when they mature, and these are also tall enough that they are helping with shade. Sometimes they can be a trellis for a climbing plant. They're that tall. When they mature, they make food for birds and wild birds and for my chickens. So just a good stacking plant, a plant with a lot of uses. This is a spearmint that I planted first to keep the squash bugs away from my squash. And it comes up all over the garden. And it's not a problem. It's a hard thing for people to wrap their heads around, having a vigorous thing that is just going where it wants. But if you can let go of that, it can do great things in your garden. Dandelions, not in the mint family, obviously, but another deep-rooted perennial that we're used to seeing as a pest. It is a wonderful thing for pollinators. It's a great thing in the garden. I don't even try to stop them from seeding in anymore. The greens are so highly nutritious that if you can stomach them, you should eat them. I still have trouble with that. Chickens love them. They're very good for the chickens. They're very good for, the deer coming through when there's not a lot of vegetation in the spring. But they're also dynamic accumulators. They have these deep tap roots that go very deep. They are perennials, so they're supporting fungal growth all year round, bringing up nutrients from very deep. But also if I have a dandelion that's really out of place, I go to pull it up. There are always good earthworms right there. They seem drawn to them. They seem to work well together. So I think they're harboring good soil life in their vicinity. And they're beautiful. So this is a illustration of a food forest, which is a permaculture concept, but this is really the kind of thing that indigenous tribes have done all over the place. Any place there's been enough moisture to grow trees and forests, people would select out from the forests around them or jungle trees that were highly productive and plant them where they grew, or if they were nomads, they would travel to where they were growing in the forest. So having Here we have an apple tree. We have what looks like a mulberry tree. We have some things mostly for looks. There's hollyhock in there. There are herbs. There are shrubs. All of these can be producing food close. They don't have to be widely spaced. They're helping each other by their proximity. Another example of a food forest, it looks like a place warmer than we are, but I think I'm seeing figs. I'm seeing a trellised squash. Look at how lush that is. You can have things growing that closely together if you're feeding your soil, you're not turning it over, and you can always have your annual crops growing in the spaces between all of these woody crops. So this is my use of a tree in my garden. You can kind of see the edges of the beds of stone there. This is a sour cherry tree that is probably 12 years old by now. It's good sized. The next picture shows, it'd be easier to see if it had leaves on it, but you can kind of see the outline of it. It's just in the center of one bed. And when its shade travels, the shade moves across the garden as the sun moves through the sky. And when we're having a really hot, dry spell, you can see the difference in the plants that get the benefit of a few hours of shade during the middle of a hot day. It's a good thing. They're still getting plenty of light. They're not in full shade. So incorporating trees into a regular garden, especially with the changes that we have seen in our weather, it can do you a lot of good. And that's besides that it is feeding the birds cherries, making cherries for me, making a trellis for some of the climbing things that I grow, and its roots are in the soil, partnering with mycorrhizal fungi. So this is a dynamic accumulator that is dock. We don't love it in general. It makes a tall flower spike. It puts seeds all over the place. It's almost impossible to get out. But again, it is bringing up nutrients from down deep. It's very easy for me to cut it off, to do what's called chop and drop. Just leave the leaves there or put them in the compost pile. And that adds those deep nutrients to the surface. All I really need to do is to cut it before it sets seed. I can even let it flower if I'm really paying attention, and then the pollinators get the benefit of that. So learning to let some things live that you might otherwise not can give you benefits. And it's also a way of letting go of full control. We're really not trying to control nature. We're trying to work with it here. This is a legume. It looks like probably the leaves from a locust tree, but any legume. If you're having cutting down your bean plants at the end of the season, those are very high in nitrogen. Add those to the soil. Any legume crop, if its foliage goes on the soil, it will enrich it after it dies. But if it's taking in an excess of nitrogen, it will be sharing that with other plants through its root zone. So interspersing leguminous crops is a way to need less in the way of inputs, like adding manure. You can get the same level of protein if you're adding leguminous crops into your garden. This is some more chop and drop. These are all comfrey plants that have just been cut down. They're forming a mulch around this fruit tree, and they will wither in place. They'll get broken down by soil bacteria. All those deep nutrients that they brought up will be entering the topsoil. And until then, they're shading the topsoil just like any mulch would. So you don't just need mint family members. There are other aromatic plants that will bring you pollinators, that will deter chewing pests, that are beautiful. Yarrow is one of those. This is a series of cultivars of different colors, but the wild yarrow is very easy to get. It's just white. It attracts lots of pollinators. It has a strong smell that deters deer from your garden. You put yarrow around the outside in a few patches, and deer will not be investigating. It also is, to some degree, a rodent repellent. So all good things. Valerian is another one, very stinky roots. Voles stay away from it. It's the origin of the drug that Valium was originally made from and still used as a sedative. Beautiful, beautiful flowers, very tall, sweet, lovely scent, attracts all kinds of pollinators. I don't know that it deters chewing insects, but another good perennial to have around, especially if you really don't want to let mint have total sway. And it self-seeds easily. So another thing we
What?
think about, yeah, go ahead.
Somebody missed the name of that one.
That was valerian. I should know the Latin name, but I don't offhand. It's Valerian. And if you're coming to the garden, I could give you some valerian babies because it self-seeds very well. So another thing you want to be concerned about in permaculture, or that's part of the larger vision, is where's your water coming from? Where's your wind coming from? This garden is in a narrow little valley, and the wind sweeps in from the north and the northwest, and it would just dry the heck out of my little peas in the spring. So I put up this I added to this fence that was already there with all this driftwood that you see, and it doesn't stop the wind, but it slows it down, which is really what I want. I have kiwi vines growing on it, which later in the year, when they're all, you can see them there, the parts that look really untidy. Um, when they're all leafed out, they really help to slow the wind down, and it just buffers the atmosphere around tender plants. There's asparagus growing on the other side of that, and it's somewhat shaded by the kiwi vines, but mostly it's just protected from the north wind, and they're just all happy together. Let's see what else we have. So I want to look just real briefly at some bigger picture permaculture. This is an example of what's called the Miyawaki forest. Miyawaki was a Japanese man who pioneered a technique of starting climax forests from scratch without the long period of succession that you would expect. And those were generally positioned in places to provide buffers either of sound or of sight or of wind around factories that were loud, around workplaces that were dusty, in order to shield people from those effects. And so they grow very quickly. They are stabilizing soil in areas that are open. And you can get benefits of a little tiny forest that is even like 10 by 10 feet. You'll have air being cleared. You'll have temperatures being lowered. You'll have moisture being retained, higher humidity levels under the trees. Every place where trees are growing together, nature's getting a foothold again. So this is a 20-year-old Miyawaki forest. You can see how lush it is. And once they're underway, they're doing all the benefits you would expect for the air, for the soil, but also for wildlife and for people who are enjoying it. Another permaculture technique writ large, probably not applicable to a lot of our gardens, but just to look at the bigger picture. These are, I think, hazelnut trees. So producing a crop, producing shade, being perennial roots in the ground, anchoring the soil, grass underneath that is also anchoring the soil, also looks like a rich and diverse crop. It's not just one kind of grass. And it's feeding sheep, which are making wool, making meat. So stacking functions in one place, multiple layers. This is another technique that is drawn from nature. It's called mob grazing. This is mimicking the movement of herds of herbivores that used to move across the landscape. In the Americas, that would be buffalo, but all the large savanna areas in all the continents had herbivores that were in large herds building up soil fertility. This is the movement of these large herds of buffalo or now cattle that really deepen soil and help it to hold moisture in areas where there's not enough rainfall to support trees, but you still want something to catch that moisture. Places where topsoil in the Great Plains was 14 feet deep, that was from the action of moving herds. And so mob grazing mimics those ancient patterns by moving large numbers of animals quickly. And in places where the soil's been badly degraded, it's able to regenerate soil at an amazing, amazing rate. So this is a project in India where earthworks are being done that will capture monsoon rains, limit flooding, allow water to soak in when there is so much of it during the monsoons. If it is slowed down enough to soak in, it raises the water table. When the water table starts to come up, you can support trees and shrubs. When you're supporting trees and shrubs, you're holding the soil. When you're holding the soil, it's easier for water to soak in. So you get this virtuous cycle that is improving all the time. So instead of a cycle of flood and drought, you get a cycle that is kind of spiraling upwards with deeper, richer soil, with higher water tables. And this kind of thing can happen on small scales also. It can happen in your garden, but to see it happening in large areas that have been badly degraded really is very hopeful. So that is about the end of what I have to say there. There might be a little something else I wanted to touch on. A couple main theories just to leave you with. To remember that when you have bare soil, you're going to have more weed seeds exposed to light. You're going to have more soil drying out. You're going to have weaker plants. You're going to have organic matter drying out, carbon oxidizing into the atmosphere, and you're setting things up for pests and disease. When you have the soil covered and becoming more fertile, those things start to work for you. You'll be retaining moisture, you'll have healthier plants, and well, it's gotten really dark.
I know.
Feels like it's really night here. And you'll have more water storage in the soil if you're just raising the organic matter content by mulching, keeping it covered, having ground covers, but especially if you have hugelculture beds. If you think of the layers you want to have in something like that, I would advise anybody who's starting a new garden to put in at least one hugelculture and see the benefits of it. So if you're putting in brush, you're getting those nutrients from the small growing tips. Rotten wood will give you soil that's already, or wood that's already teeming with microbes. Newer wood will give you long-lasting benefits as it takes longer to break down. Then you put decent soil on there. You add a good mulch, a good ground cover on top of the mulch, and the plants you put in there will not have any choice but to thrive. Will have everything they need, and they'll be so much lower maintenance. There is work. It is still work to have a permaculture garden, but it's not war. You're not fighting nature. You're working with nature, and the benefits are so dramatic. So keep your soil covered. Don't mix the soil, but mix your crops up so you're not having large groups of plants that are a target for your chewing insects. Don't be afraid to mix in mint, other aromatic plants. They have all kinds of benefits. And throw in things that you like just the looks of. Have something beautiful in there. Use natural things to buffer the wind and to collect water. And I think that about covers it. And remember, biology, growing things, living things are the most effective way to draw down carbon and to store moisture in your soil. And now I'll turn it over to Kyle.
So much awesome information. Thank you, Laurie. So it's great. So I did put into the chat if anybody has a question, they can chat it, or if they certainly can raise their hand too if they want to unmute and ask a question. And maybe if anybody's chatting a question, I'll ask a question first, Laurie, and that's
Yep.
when you were starting your own garden, sort of changing over from maybe how you started to what you do now. Do you remember kind of maybe one of the first things that you really tried to do that was permaculture related, kind of where you began?
Well, it's very good soil where I work. I'm very lucky to have that, but it's in a cold spot and it doesn't get a lot of sun. So I did what I could to increase the heat that I could collect there by using stone to build my raised beds. And that is not necessary for most people. It's really helpful where I am. This is a frost pocket that would always get the last frost in the spring and the first frost in the fall. And now that's not the case anymore because the wood changes, the stones change the microclimate there by absorbing heat during the day. Um, I wanted raised beds because the soil there, if you had a wet spring, you just couldn't do anything with it until it dried out. And that helps it to drain well. When I learned to put wood inside the beds, it was a huge leap forward in terms of just equalizing the moisture throughout the season. Um, so that's what I started with. And then there were weeds that turned to be nice flowers, and I would let them live, and I'd learn a little more, and I would experiment with things. And I did hear from my mother-in-law, whose traditional garden had been there for decades before I took it over. I don't know why you're always trying new things. So that is kind of the way I do things. I fell into a lot of this backwards by not knowing where it would lead, and it's just been a fun journey.
Like that. I believe our Nubanoosit crew, I think
As a
Barbara
question?
Joe had
Uh,
raised their hand. So
I got some sheep's wool and I put it around my little bean and pea sprouts, and then the wind came up and I watered it so it was all soaked and I thought it was okay, and then the wind came. And I so this time I I just put some dirt on top of it, but that sort of means bare dirt again.
I would so the soil that you put on top of it will weigh it down, which is what you wanted, but it would also dry out and potentially blow away or soak through it. But what I would do is I would put bark mulch or something woody on top of it will keep it doing what you want. You'll be getting all the benefits out of it. Um, if it's thick enough, the thickness at which I put it down, it doesn't typically blow away, but you may be in a bit more of a windswept area. I would
Yeah.
I would put something woodier on top of it.
What
If
if I have seeds planted underneath it? Are they going to have a hard time coming up?
I would make a little opening in the wool for them to come up. Usually if I'm putting small seeds in, I will check under the wool. If I'm putting in something big and sturdy like beans, they'll come up through it fine. Does that answer your question?
Wood chips?
Um, if you're having little seeds under the wool, they are going to have trouble coming up through whether you have wood chips on top or not. So I would make a little opening in the wool so they can see light and get through. Typically, I will leave a little gap for seeds to come up through if they're smallish ones. If it's something, again, big and sturdy like a bean, they usually are fine to come through on their own. Or at least you can see them and then make an opening for them. Anybody else?
yeah, we definitely got some questions.
Okay.
Um, I'll just go down from the top. Kathy, not a question, but said, nice presentation. You made it so much easier than the books that Kathy has. So,
Oh,
and
thank you.
Kathy's coming to the in-person too, and
Oh,
says
good.
is excited. Cassidy asked, what has been your biggest challenges or biggest frustrations, especially when you started out?
Needing to go in at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Um, there's as I said, it is still work. There's still things that have to be done. And I'm not down on the ground, but I still have to bend over to work in the beds. Um, I do spread fresh wool when the old wool is starting to turn into dirt, turn into soil. And there's some work involved. I spread my chicken manure on it, and that takes some time. But I have so much less weeding to do because the mulching is so effective at that. I don't do any watering there. Sometimes I have things that will self-seed a little vigorously, but I just love them so much. I would much rather take care of something that is overly vigorous and figure out what to do with it than pamper something that is super finicky. So I put catnip in all my beds because it is a rodent repellent. And the catnip makes beautiful, well, run-of-the-mill flowers that the pollinators love. And so, of course, I would let them flower and then they would set seed, and their seeds are all fertile and they're all vigorous. So instead of one plant in each bed, which would make 10 plants, there's about 80 plants now. So I pull them up, make sure I get most of their roots, and I put them someplace where I can use them. Because they're a rodent repellent, I've been putting them around my fruit trees to keep the mice from nibbling on the fruit trees. I would be hard pressed to actually kill them. But when they're producing a lot and their flower stalks will get 3 to 4 feet high, I'll take an armload and I take them down to the vet so they can drug all their kitties. I put them around my chicken pen because even with good sanitation, rats will try to come and be neighbors when you have chickens, and they will leave the vicinity if you have catnip there. So these things that could be a source of frustration, it's, if you look at it a different way, it's an opportunity. So, and I found that to be the case with all these things that are super vigorous. I really don't have things there that I have to pamper. So when the mint gets out of hand, I make a whole bunch of mint syrup or mint tea, or I put it in the chicken pen so it smells better. With the anise hyssop, I'll make bunches of it, and they like to eat the leaves. My chickens will eat the leaves of it. The anise hyssop I know is deterring deer. So a lot of these things that could be considered problematic have so many uses that I've found them to be really opportunities.
I wonder if one of the big challenges of people who may be transitioning, or those who are transitioning to, to doing more permaculture. I think our brains like the nice, neat rows and some of the order of our gardens and farms, and
Yeah,
certainly to some type brains, the images of some of the permaculture can be a little nerve-wracking. Or
yeah, yeah.
how do I control that? That
It's
looks all over the place.
it is really you need to kind of reprogram and understand that when we have controlled nature, we have always destroyed the ecosystems that we're working with. And that goes for, the beautiful land of the Fertile Crescent that was all annual agriculture, and now it's desert. The Nile Delta, same thing. The places that have mixed crops, mixed forests are the places that thrive. And when you have a crop that is just a chunk of stuff, I used to have a raised bed that was all beans. And the second year that I had one area that was just beans, bean beetles moved in. I'd never seen them before, and they decimated them. I had made a wonderful spread for them that was a perfect target. And so seeing the effects of having what'd be considered a normal garden, straight rows with soil in between, seeing the problems that it causes, the ways it attracts pests, the ways that diseases can build up in the soil, it makes it a little easier to change your mind about some of those things. And you don't have to do it all at once. You should start with a few things that are a little outside your comfort zone, and let some perennials reseed in your garden, or use a thicker mulch than you've used before, or put wood in 1 or 2 garden beds just to see how it goes. And you don't have to try everything at once. And it's a big change for a brain that was raised to do what we call traditional gardening. I absolutely was. Um, but it's one of those, once you try it, you don't go back. Um, that's been my experience.
Definitely. Well, I got a few questions, so maybe we'll just try to rapid fire them a little bit,
Yep, go ahead.
and make sure we get out of here on time too. So I think we've got, I believe, Edie. How long did it take for the jumping worms to move out? Or maybe you still have them, probably, but they're shifting.
So when I first discovered I had jumping worms, the wool mulch that I was using was like floating above the soil as a crust, which was odd because the regular earthworms draw it down into the soil strand by strand, and it becomes really incorporated into the soil. And this was just floating. And when I picked it up, the soil under it was dry and crumbly, which I learned later was the traditional, the trademark droppings of the jumping worms. And so when they got to the wool, they left, but they had trashed my soil in the process, and they left this wool mulch kind of as a crust that was ineffective. So then I started weighing it down with wood chips, making sure that wool was in contact with the soil. And in places where the wool was in contact with the soil, they left immediately. They would even leave the good organic matter that they wanted to eat because they didn't want to be around the wool. Or at least that's my interpretation because of what happened. They would leave the area and they went into the adjacent raspberries. And then when I started putting wool in there, they left the raspberries and went into the grass. The interesting thing is that if you've seen jumping worms, they thrash, they move. I think for the things that live in the soil, they must make noise. Moles have very good hearing and they are always tracking worms to eat. And I would see mole tunnels converging in the areas where the jumping worms were leaving the garden. It was just fascinating. It's happened in 3 different places and it's a system. I think they hear the worms when they're doing this exodus and they just converge on them and eat them. Are they all gone? They are not. But I have found that they leave, and if the wool is in contact with the soil, they leave as fast as they can. So it just took me a few years to figure that out. But it doesn't take that long to get them to move, but it does not kill them. It gets them to move. So
Interesting.
that's what I found.
Well,
Next.
we're all looking for more jumping worm knowledge these days. So,
Yep.
we
Anything
keep
else?
going. Yeah, just I think 2 more. I think also from Barbara Joe and company, and then Cassidy. Cassidy said do deal with invasive species. Cassidy noted battling knotweed, or they're battling knotweed.
Okay, so real quickly, do not have knotweed, but I have some other invasives that are just annoy the hell out of me. Glossy buckthorn is the worst. And what I found is if I go with that set it back and don't try to kill it mentality, if you cut glossy buckthorn to the ground, it will send up a million little shoots. And if it's an area where you can't mow, then you're faced with having to cut down many, many more little things. So I have, and this is applicable to a lot of different things. You have to pay attention and learn what its growth habit is. So I cut glossy buckthorn halfway down, and then it grows new shoots on that trunk. And then I cut it just below that. And all that energy it put into those new branches is wasted, and the roots are relieved of a lot of their strength. A lot of their energy has gone into that, but I cut them down before they have a chance to make new leaves or send a lot more energy back to renew their roots. In the process, while I'm weakening this, and if you do this 2 or 3 times in a row over a couple of years, it does wear out the glossy buckthorn's energy and it dies. And the roots are still in the soil. You haven't disrupted by trying to rip stuff up. They are breaking down in the soil. They are feeding the soil. And in the interim, other things are able to grow. So there was a regular thing where our stone walls would get mowed and the glossy buckthorn would get cut, and so would all the native plants. And the glossy buckthorn would grow back faster, and the natives would grow back more slowly. So every year that it was mowed, there was more glossy buckthorn. I go through there and I cut selectively, and every year there's less glossy buckthorn and the native plants are coming back. So I would try to learn the growth pattern of whatever the invasive is that you're getting rid of. I have gotten rid of Japanese knotweed at a place I lived years ago, and it was just a process of cutting it down, going out the next week, cutting the new shoots down, going out 2 weeks later, cutting them down, wearing out the roots. And you still have the roots holding the soil, and you still have all that organic matter sitting in the soil and stabilizing it. And you're slowing this stuff down, giving other stuff a chance to grow, and bit by bit, you can wear it out. It is a commitment, but if you're ripping stuff out, you're always leaving roots behind that will usually resprout. So I have found that patient and repetitive cutting is effective, and I've used that with the invasive honeysuckle also. We don't have a lot of no, is it barberry? The bittersweet is a little worse, and I try to rip that up just because I'm so angry about it. But mostly just learning the growth patterns of what you're dealing with and working around it in such a way that you're not disrupting things, you're wearing out your invasive, and you're giving other stuff a chance to come in with their strength while you're weakening the invasive. Do you follow that?
Well, if they didn't, they'll get the recording and get another chance
Okay.
to give it a new listen.
All right. I hope
And
that makes sense.
Carrie, well, and Carrie in the chat mentioned did the same thing with knotweed, starved the roots, and it took 3 years. I feel like what I liked with a couple of the responses, and I think we'll stop on our questions. I think one of the things I'd like with your responses is that, especially with permaculture, there's a lot of just spending time out and reading, your landscape and trying things, and it's a multi-year approach. And
Yeah.
I feel like I do so many soil-based workshops, and really like good quality soil is a multi-year process. It's a
It is.
real investment, and I like, a lot of things you're mentioning with just this time spent in your
You need
space,
to spend
learning your
time.
space.
So one thing that I usually say at the beginning, and I forgot that I want to leave you with, is that permaculture is like a gateway drug to enjoying your garden more and understanding nature better.
Mm. That's
That's that.
spot on. That's spot on. Well, thank you, Laura. This was a ton of great information, and a lot of people in attendance are saying thank you, and that I know a good portion of people who are here will be in attendance at the in-person. But this was great. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Thank you.